Hello again. This is just another quick follow-up. This one will be related to continuing on with our animated graphs or infographics. This one will be line graph only. I'll try to keep it brief. Same things apply. This is outlined in the tutorials that have been assigned, and also there's a zip file with the project file I'll show you. It's missing some assets, but those were already converted to shape layers, so you should still be able to see everything. Um, so first, what I would start with in this kind of example, just really quickly, is a line, right? So for a line graph, right, we need a line for our thing to be animated on. And this, just like other kinds of infographics, if it makes sense or is easier, probably design it outside of After Effects. This time I just drew with the pen tool and then gave a stroke with a rounded cap. Following that, I made a circle. And then that circle is just centered so the anchor point is in the middle of the frame. And I did that the same way that I've done in the past. Just double click on the ellipse tool and then go into that path and resize it so that it fits into a circular shape instead of the ellipse that's elongated because of the frame size. A couple of really easy ways to think about this. First, I might just take that circle, put it onto my line, and then using position, I can add keyframes for where I want that shape to go. If it is too straight of a line, let's say as I move up to here, I've got a weird, not quite the same bend in there, and that's from the automatic spatial interpolation, which is making it go on a Bezier curve, but it's doing it in an automatic way. I can always go in between those frames and sort of going in a pose-to-pose sort of process. I can animate those keyframes to be a little bit closer to my line. So although this isn't necessarily the best way to do the work, it's totally doable. It's not necessarily going to be as accurate, but it should function. Now, another way of handling some of this would be to take the path, which I already drew, and then use that path as a way to change the position of the other layer or the thing that's highlighting something. So in order to do that, I just come into the shape, I grab its path, and I'll copy it. So Command C. Now, I already positioned my circle where I wanted it to start. What usually ends up happening is that when you paste the the path of something onto the position of another layer, it will be based off of anchor points and things like that. So what I might end up with is something that's going to look like it's off of the line, but I can always move it back on. What I really need is for these keyframes from this path to be the way that I calculate the position of the other thing. So I'll come back to the position of my circle and paste, and you'll see, just like what I was talking about, it sort of jumped up, and that's all right because I can move it back down. But it's added position keyframes along my timeline based on my line graph. And in terms of correcting it, really all I need to do is just grab that whole thing, make sure that all of those position keyframes are highlighted, and then I can slide it down to where I need it to go. Now, if this were going to be my project, I would again use this as my blocked in animation, and then I'd come in and refine keyframes and do all the kind of fun stuff. Probably it's going to end up wanting to be a little bit faster, so maybe it only takes 1 second for it to draw through that loop. Maybe I want to add motion blur, maybe I want to add some other effects, but the point is that once we get started, and have a way to translate the path of one thing onto the position animation of something else, we can get something that will read a lot like an animated line graph. On top of that, I could even go a step further, and I could add trim paths to my line. So let's say I'm going to slide these position keyframes down in time a little bit. And maybe I want my line to draw out. So I'm going to go into my trim path. I'm going to start the end a few frames in, and then I'm going to go ahead and probably want it to maybe be just a little bit ahead of that circle, or maybe I want it to be right on time with it. So in this case, it's going to start to read as if it were drawing along with my circle. So I guess I wanted to keep this one relatively short. This is sort of like a building block, or just like the other infographic animations that I was showing earlier. In this case, my timing's way off, but I think you can see that with just a couple of strategies based off of some of the things that we've done in the past, it should be pretty manageable to incorporate this sort of workflow with more of what we're interested in doing in our assignments and in our projects. So that example, in the downloadable zip file, you'll see that there's another version of the same sort of thing. This one is basically the same kind of thing. This is a line graph for action potential, which is a behavioral neuroscience thing. We used to do that for the animated infographic project, the explainer, which is coming up, and I'll have a video for you on the website relatively soon. But you can see that, with this kind of workflow, you can get some pretty dramatic and dynamic things to happen. And then just because I was messing around with this other times, we could also think about how a graph is really going to need transitions of some sort. So not only is it kind of transitional in terms of like how it's animated onto or off of the screen, we might also think about how we could move the location of something in the frame and still have it be animated or dynamic. And in this case, it's just the same pre-composition. It's just rotated in 3D and then over to the corner so that other information might be animated into the main part of the frame. So that's it for this one. Thanks a lot.